Hello there, coming to you from the bunker. This is episode 25 of Watchtower in Focus, the show that zooms in on all things JW, bringing the governing body and its teachings and policies under microscopic scrutiny. On the weekend of July 13th and 14th, millions of Jehovah's Witnesses globally attended a meeting at which a Watchtower magazine article assured them that their religion takes child sex abuse seriously as a crime and endeavors to cooperate with authorities in reporting any allegations. Unbeknownst to them, less than 3 weeks earlier, their leadership's lawyers delivered a petition to the Supreme Court of the United States of America, insisting on the rights of Jehovah's Witnesses as a religion to keep records of known child abusers confidential on grounds of clergy penitent privilege. Joining me to discuss this remarkable case is ever-present Watchtower in Focus co-host Mark O'Donnell, who has spent weeks researching this story. Also joining the panel for this episode is filmmaker and co-producer on the forthcoming Truth About the Truth documentary, Javier Ortiz. And for the first time, we'd like to give a warm welcome to journalist, Scientology watchdog, and author of The Unbreakable Miss Lovely, How the Church of Scientology Tried to Destroy Paulette Cooper, Tony Ortega, who will be sharing his outsider perspective. Mark, Javier, and Tony, welcome.
Hey.
Well, from my bunker to yours. Great to be here, Lloyd.
Yes, there's a link between the two bunkers happening, which is very special. So thank you so much, Tony, for joining us.
Great to be here, guys. Thanks, Lloyd.
Same here.
So again, Mark.
25th. Our 25th anniversary. 25th
episode, indeed. Who would have thought from such humble beginnings that we would be this far along and with such big guests on the panel? So fantastic. Mark, you have been, as I said, researching this story for weeks. You've been trawling through legal documents. You've been speaking to lots of people. Tell us as succinctly as you can what on earth this is about, because it seems at face value to be a stunning act of hypocrisy on the part of Watchtower.
Yeah, paging through these trial documents, it's really an understatement to say that this is a complicated case. It is a very long-standing, complicated civil case that now has reached the level of the Supreme Court. Although, in fairness to the case itself, it hasn't been accepted by the Supreme Court, and we'll get into that. So what we're calling this case here is JW versus Watchtower. Although to be specific, JW, first of all, is the initials of the victim in this particular case, who was a girl that was about 9 years of age when she was victimized by the perpetrator, whose name is Gilbert Simmental. And the defendants in this case are not only the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of New York, but they are also two congregations, the Mountain View congregation and a second congregation in California. Primarily, Mountain View was the congregation that Gilbert Simmental attended, and the elders had a great number of dealings with Simmental, as well as the victim in this case, and there were multiple victims. So maybe to bring people up to speed, you may not have heard a lot about this case, but it's probably one of the most important cases to ever come down the pike as far as Jehovah's Witness child abuse cases. The reason is that it is one of a series of cases in which the Zalkin law firm has demanded the documents from Watchtower responsive to the 1997 famous Body of Elders letter where they said, send us information about any appointed men, ministerial servants, elders, pioneers, special pioneers that have been accused or have been confirmed to be pedophiles or have been accused of child molestation. So as a result of that 1997 letter, a number of civil cases have been filed. And in this particular case, we have a victim whose family, whose parents have come forward, and they've said to Watchtower, they originally weren't going to file this case, but this amounted to trying to get to the facts of the case and understanding why this man, who had been convicted of being a child molester in a court of law, in a criminal court around the year 2008, was not disfellowshipped from the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses. It was disfellowshipped later, after the civil trial started. So I think we're going to field a lot of questions to this, and I'll try to give a little bit of a summary of exactly what happened in this case, and we're going to produce a JW survey article in about the next 24 hours.
Yeah, so just to reiterate, viewers will be able to get a full rundown of all of this in your article, which we're hoping will be up on JW Survey very shortly, and I'll make sure there's a link in the description once that's available. Would it be fair to say, in summary, that there was a lawsuit in California where Watchtower was asked to produce part of its records, its secret records of child abusers as part of a case? They refused to do it, which put them in contempt of court, which meant that they lost the lawsuit without it going through trial. And as a result of that, they are now appealing to the Supreme Court for their right as a religion to keep records of this nature secret. Would that be correct?
Yeah, that's very close. And I want to emphasize to the public, of course, that none of us are attorneys. So some of the things that we say will be layman speak, and there might be some details that we need to clarify in the comment section later. So we're happy to entertain those questions, and we'll get the correct answers to that. But yes, this is not a case where Watchtower is saying this crime didn't happen. This is a case where Watchtower has fought the courts all the way back to the criminal case, and they're saying that these conversations between elder bodies and other elder bodies and Watchtower in New York and Watchtower's legal department, all of these people who know about what this man did or what any pedophile did should be kept confidential and should not be released upon the demand of attorneys like Erwin Zalkin and his firm or any of the other firms.
And on what grounds are they saying that it should be kept confidential?
Right. So they're claiming what you mentioned earlier, which is clergy penitent privilege and First Amendment grounds. So in other words, you have the First Amendment guarantees the freedom of religion, freedom to practice religion in the manner that your religion practices it, which is different from how Catholics and others practice it. So one of the arguments that Watchtower is making in this Supreme Court appeal is the argument that they're being unfairly treated or compared to the Catholic Church, which has a different model. The Catholic Church has a model where they have clergy penitent privilege when a penitent person, a single penitent person who's committed some sort of crime or sin, goes to the priest and says, I've done something wrong and I want to talk to you about it. I want to get this off my chest. And as a result, the priest listens to this person and maybe tells, gives them some advice, reads them scripture, tells them to do a few Hail Marys, whatever the case. And that is information that the priest is not allowed to divulge to the authorities. However, there are some exceptions to that. And in many states, there are laws that allow a priest or a clergyman to report matters related to child abuse to the authorities as an exception to clergy penitent privilege. So,
sorry, just before we proceed, I'd just like to bring in Tony. Tony, are you aware of any organizations claiming religious status that would appreciate having an opportunity to keep records of this nature secret?
Well, the Church of Scientology has actually been in this position numerous times. And as Mark was describing the case, it made me think of several fairly recent cases that Scientology has gone through. And probably the one that you might be familiar with is the lawsuit of Laura DiCrescenzo. She joined Scientology's Sea Org at only 12 years old. She went through just, the deprivations of the Sea Org. She was, working 90 hours a week as a 12-year-old. And when she turned 13, they moved her to the adult schedule of 112 hours a week. And as she alleges that at the age of 17, still technically a child, she was forced to have an abortion by the Church of Scientology, which was the Sea Org's policy from around the mid-70s until at least 2009, that women could not have children in the Sea Org because of the working conditions, and so they were basically forced to have abortions. One of the things that Laura wanted to have in her court case was her records, her folders. If you know something about Scientology, you know that they just keep incredible records of everything you do. And she knew there would be records in there discussing her abortion and other things. And so she went to the judge at some point. She first started suing in 2009, I think somewhere around 2011, 2012. She went to the judge, and the judge ordered, yes, Church of Scientology, give her her own records. I mean, they weren't even asking. Mark was talking about conversations between officials in the church. I think that would be a little tougher to get in this kind of scenario. But Laura just wanted her own records. And the Church of Scientology, like the Watchtower, fought it all the way to the Supreme Court. And they made the same argument that this is a religious setting, and this is religious discussions going on, and they did compare it to Catholic confession. Now, what tripped them up, because ultimately the California Supreme Court did not take their appeal, and the U.S. Supreme Court also declined to take their appeal. And I'm sure Mark's going to talk about that in this case, because just because you petition the Supreme Court doesn't mean they take it. What tripped them up, and this is what I was going to ask you guys about Jehovah's Witnesses to see if it's similar, was that in Catholic confession, you have a priest sitting down with a parishioner, and the parishioner discusses these things, and some of them may be these damaging secrets, and it's all just verbal. The priest would never take notes, okay? This is just a verbal exchange between a priest and a parishioner, and that's as far as it goes. The priest isn't even allowed to talk about it to the other priests. And yes, as Mark brought up, there are cases where the priest might be obliged to say something to law enforcement. In California, they're trying to pass a law now that would force one priest to turn in another priest that confessed to certain crimes. But in general, that's as far as it goes. Scientology was claiming that Laura's auditing files should fall under the same privilege, and that those files are sacrosanct. But in Scientology, everything you say, and again, I want to hear how different it is in Jehovah's Witnesses, but in Scientology, everything you say in those sessions is not only written down, it's videotaped. I mean, they have all these records of everything you have ever said in these confessional sessions. And I mean, people get stacks and stacks of files as they go on. And not only that, but those files are then reviewed by multiple case supervisors and other people, other officials. In Laura's case, the Church of Scientology had to admit that more than 200 Church of Scientology officials had access to her files. So it's about as completely different from Catholic confession as you can get. And the California's appeals court agreed with Laura's team that this is just not the same thing. You don't get that privilege to turn over the files. And only after the church failed to convince the U.S. Supreme Court to get involved did they turn over those files. And just as another thing I'm curious about is these attorneys, how they lie. The church's attorneys to the U.S. Supreme Court was talking about how religious this material was. And then once we actually got those records, because I got copies, there's nothing religious in them at all. It's just disgusting records of how a child is being abused. And this is what the church wanted to hide from the public. I'm sure the same thing is happening in JW.
It's quite chilling, really, to see such commonalities as you're talking between the kind of process with Scientology and Jehovah's Witnesses. I want to bring in Mark so we can kind of delve deeper into exactly what Watchtower is arguing. But before we do that, Javier, you've been looking through the response to Watchtower's petition, I think what Watchtower is trying to do is say it's unfair that the Catholics get to have this provision and it doesn't apply to us simply because our procedure is different, simply because rather than it being one individual that is the bearer of this knowledge verbally, as Tony was saying, it's instead knowledge that's passed through potentially dozens of people and is kept on records, sometimes digital records that people can access. Would that be fair?
Yeah, that seems to be how I understand it. And Mark, you're better versed in this legal stuff a lot more than I am. But from what I understand, the argument that Watchtower is making is basically that by the court forcing them to produce these documents, the government is essentially interfering in their religious authority and ability to create their own policies within their religion without any interference from the government. And from what I understand from Zalkin's response is that the claims that they're making as to their constitutional rights that are being, according to them, infringed upon are not arguments that they made in any of the lower courts. And so that it doesn't make sense that they be trying to make these arguments before the Supreme Court. And I'll let you tell me if I got that more or less right, but that just seems to be the way that I understood what I've read so far.
Yeah, I think, attorneys could explain it better than any of us could, but I really feel like maybe I should go back a little bit and describe the case itself and then fast forward back up to this First Amendment and this establishment clause in the First Amendment, which is really one of Watchtower's key arguments. So going back to the case itself, this is a really an awful case of abuse. And first of all, what happened here is that this man, who was an elder for well over a decade, conducted a Bible study, was well respected by the congregation, or so we thought. His name was Gilbert Simmental. Ultimately, there was a slumber party that happened in, it was
July 2006.
2006, July 15th, the slumber party happened. And what we found out was that at least 3 girls that attended this party, including the plaintiff, JW, was sexually molested at that pool party in what the defense attorney, what the prosecuting attorney called a spree of molestation, because not only did he sexually abuse several of the girls in his own swimming pool at his house, but then later that night, he snuck into their bedrooms as they slept in this slumber party, and one after another crawled into their beds and abused them. So this was a very, very serious crime. 2 of the girls, who were fleshly sisters and also Jehovah's Witness girls, came forward about a month later after the pool party incident and revealed to their witness parents that they had been molested. And the parents did what most other Jehovah's Witness parents do. They didn't call the police, they called the elders, who said, let us handle it. The elders launched their own investigation. And at the time, the plaintiff, JW, who was just 8 or 9 years old at the time, didn't have the ability or strength to come forward and say what had happened to her. It wasn't until a year later that she ended up testifying that this happened to her. And ultimately, this man, Simmental, let's go back a little bit. The elders never contacted the police. Under no circumstances were they going to cooperate with or contact the police.
It was a school principal with, I'm sorry.
Correct. So what had happened was the parents then were very concerned because Simmental had a daughter himself who was at this pool party, and they all attended the same school. So the parents of these 2 girls who spoke to the authorities, what they did was they went not only to the elders, but they said, hey, we'll let the school principal know because we don't want Simmental coming and picking up our kids or touching our kids or doing anything. They didn't know that the school principal was a mandated reporter and that this whole thing was going to blow up into a case that would take down this man, Gilbert Simmental. They just wanted to keep this guy away from their kids. And so they did. They went to the school principal, who immediately, as a mandated reporter, contacted the local police. And the whole thing blew up into a police investigation. And I'll just read the summary of this. It went to trial. And a prosecutor's name was Burke Strunsky. I'll bring him up later, but it says that a jury found defendant Gilbert Simmental guilty of 3 counts of lewd and lascivious acts upon a child under the age of 14. Jury also found that the defendant committed the offense against multiple victims within the meaning of Penal Code Section 667, etc. Defendant was sentenced to 3 consecutive terms of 15 years to life. Defendant's sole contention on appeal. Now, first of all, he's in jail for 45 years to life. These are 3 consecutive, not concurrent, 3 consecutive 15-year sentences. He's not going to see the light of day ever. Defendant's sole contention on appeal is that the trial court's failure to exclude his admissions to his church elders violated the penitential communication privilege. We reject this contention and affirm the judgment, because he appealed the criminal case. So what I'm saying here is that he admitted to the elders that he touched these girls, and the elders then tried to cover up the allegation. So when the prosecutor came calling, and by the way, he's written a book, his name is Burke Strunsky, and it's called The Humanity of Justice. I recommend, it's not expensive. You can get it on Kindle or through Amazon on softback. So this man wrote a book in which the entirety of chapter 7 is devoted to this horrendous case of Simmental and how he refused to cooperate with the judicial system, because in order to put this man in jail, they needed the testimony from the elders that Simmental had confessed to the elders, but they wouldn't give it up. The elders consulted Watchtower. They said, no way, this is clergy privilege, and we can't break that seal, and we're not giving you the information. So what the attorney did, the prosecutor, Mr. Strunsky, did, was he used what I call Strunsky's strategy. And he got into the Shepherd the Flock of God book, which, of course, this is the 2010 version here. So he got the elders book from other attorneys, and he looked into Watchtower's judicial procedures, and he found a section in there where elders would take one judicial hearing if there was an appeal hearing, and they would give the notes or the information from that initial judicial disfellowshipping case and give them to the appeal hearing elders. And what he did was he questioned these 2 elders on the witness stand, one in particular, and he said, is it true that Jehovah's Witness elders, when there is an appeal hearing, will give the information from the initial judicial hearing over to the appellate hearing and share all of that information, in addition to sharing it with New York's Service Department and Legal Department? And so the elder was forced to say yes, and the judge said, that's not clergy privilege. Under no circumstances. All of this information is being shared. It is not clergy privilege. And as a result, the judge said their testimony is admissible, and they are forced to testify as to what Simmental told them. So they had to, on the witness stand, they were forced, they were not willing, they were forcibly told to reveal to the jury what this man had revealed to them, his admissions. And as a result of that strategy from Strunsky using the Elders Manual against Watchtower, that is what allowed them to prove that they had broken clergy privilege. So this man went to jail for a long time. But let me just fast forward. That was 2008. 2013, he still had not been, actually he was disfellowshipped, but initially Simmental was not disfellowshipped by the elders, even though he had admitted to the crimes, not just one victim, not just 2, but at least 3. And then during the trial, we come to find out that there were additional victims who came forward. In fact, one who, as it turns out, was Simmental's niece, told the prosecutor that he had abused her 30 years before. They knew this. The elders knew this, the congregation knew it, a whole bunch of people in the congregation knew it. In fact, others came forward and said, he abused me too, or he abused this girl or that girl. There was a whole bunch of people, but they couldn't use that in the criminal trial because the trial had already started. The judge didn't allow that, but he did allow the elders, force the elders to testify. What I'm getting to here is the fact that Simmental at that point still was not disfellowshipped. He had only been reproved. So no one really in the congregation knew what was going on. This man was still out there. Finally, he was thrown in jail. And then there was a decision by the family of JW to file a civil case because they wrote letters to Watchtower. They weren't getting answers, and Watchtower just blew them off. They said, we're not giving you this information. You're not privy to this, even though you're the family of the victim. This is our
Can I just play devil's advocate here, because I was briefly, can you guys hear me, by the way?
Yes.
Yes.
Watchtower refers to this case in their petition, and they rather disingenuously try to, force their narrative of what happened when it hasn't even been gone through a trial, because, again, the trial defaulted because they wouldn't cooperate with the court. But they argue on page 4 that Simmental had previously served as an elder in the Mountain View congregation, but 8 months before plaintiff's abuse, he was terminated from his role as an elder for reasons unrelated to child abuse, and the congregation was informed by an announcement that he no longer served as an elder. So their argument is nothing to do with us. This guy wasn't an elder. 8 months before he abused these girls, we removed him. So he was just some guy in the congregation. We can't have any control. We can't be responsible for him. So what were the facts of the case?
Yeah, so that's exactly right, Lloyd. So Watchtower is making a legal argument here. It's a technicality because, remember, back in the criminal case, the jury was not allowed to hear the fact that these other people had come forward and said Simmental had abused them. So, basically, Watchtower is saying, well, in the context of this legal case here, hey, he wasn't an elder when the pool party happened. But what they're not revealing is the fact that 1 year earlier, and while he was still an elder, he did abuse one or two of those sisters, the same ones who were at the pool party who ended up getting abused. A tremendous amount of abuse did happen while Simmental was an elder and had been given a lot of responsibility in the congregation. In fact, they also don't reveal that.
So just to be clear, he was an elder when he was abusing others in the congregation, and did the other elders know that he was abusing others in the congregation?
They were told, yes.
Right.
Correct.
So they did have knowledge of it, and yeah. And
Yes.
so no surprises that it was possible for other children to be abused because their knowledge wasn't acted on, basically. Yeah.
So the civil trial started in 2013, and now it's 2019. So we've come a long way from 2013. I can tell you that just the docket alone, if you look at the online docket, there's I think over 100 pages just on the list of things that happened, the court document in the JW versus Watchtower case. And each one of those lines has court documents associated with it. So there's literally tens of thousands of pages, many things that happened, including all of the appeals. So this was in the trial court in Riverside County in California, where the civil trial in which Watchtower was being held responsible for basically employing this guy, knowing that he was a known child abuser and failing to contact the authorities, just a whole host of complaints that were made against Watchtower and Mountain View and the other congregation involved. And during the discovery phase, the plaintiff, JW, and her attorneys asked for the documents. And it was not just the documents responsive to the 1997 Body of Elders letter, but it was a whole host of documents. There was an extensive number of documents that were part of what's called a privilege log. The privilege log, I've got a copy of it right here. Obviously, we don't have time to read these, but this is a privilege log. Now, this is the first of about 10 or 12 pages of the privilege log. And what this is a list. Basically, it's where Watchtower says, here's the documents that we have, but are not going to give to you because each one has a code beside it. For example, 1992 to 2006 S21 publisher record cards from the Mountain View Congregation Elders regarding Gilbert Simmental, MC, which means Minister Clergy Privilege. That means we're not giving it to you. And then page after page after page. These are all the pages of information. You wouldn't believe how much information that they have on Gilbert Simmental. All of these from 2000, 2006 up to as far as 2012, every single one says MC, minister clergy privilege. They weren't giving anything. They had no desire to cooperate with the authorities. On top of that, they didn't give those 1997 forward responsive documents, which were critical to the case because those documents would prove how Watchtower handled cases of child abuse and how they failed to report these cases to the authorities, and they refused to give them. So what resulted from all of this is a default judgment. You mentioned that earlier. So I just want to make it clear that the plaintiff, JW, finally said to the court, look, you know, Watchtower is failing to cooperate. They're not responding to our discovery request. We're asking for $4 million plus other expenses. And the judge said, absolutely, because Watchtower failed to cooperate. They granted a $4 million default judgment against Watchtower, which, by the way, Watchtower is paying a $6 million bond on, and they're paying even more now that they've appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. In every single case, they have appealed and lost, appealed and lost, appealed, and these are in the California courts, all the way up to the California Supreme Court, and they've lost. We even have a copy, and we'll post this. The decision of one of the appellate courts is called a published decision, which means that other trials and other cases can rely upon this published decision because the court decided it was that important for it to be a published decision. So Watchtower exhausted every possible avenue in California, and the only avenue left is to go to the United States Supreme Court. And the only way you can go to the Supreme Court under any circumstances is if you raise constitutional issues. So this is why they're raising the First Amendment, Fourth Amendment, I think 14th Amendment issues that have to do with their clergy procedures or their internal judicial religious procedures that they're saying were violated. Watchtower is now claiming that they are the victim of California's inappropriate legal and judicial handling of this case.
Earlier, Tony commented that just because you petition the United States Supreme Court doesn't mean they have to take up the case. Mark, are you skeptical that this will ever see the light of day before the Supreme Court?
So, yeah, I have talked to attorneys about this. So, yes, it's not likely that the Supreme Court will take this up for many different reasons. And by the way, I would encourage everyone to go to the United States Supreme Court website. Just type in Watchtower under list of cases, and you're going to see Watchtower's appeal. And then you're going to see the opposition to that appeal, which was just filed last Friday, which is one of the most brilliant oppositions. So to answer your question, you know, there are maybe 7,000 or 8,000 cases that get submitted to the Supreme Court every year. And out of those cases, usually less than 100 actually get admitted, or this is called a petition for writ of certiorari. Not saying that right, I don't think here.
Certiorari.
Yeah,
I looked it up because I had to Google that myself.
We're stretching Mark's Latin skills to the absolute limit.
I think they say certiorari. Yeah, certiorari.
Yeah.
So this is Watchtower's petition. So, you know, 7,000 to 8,000 cases go to the Supreme Court. Only about 100, 120 actually get approved to be reviewed by the Supreme Court justices. And out of those, only a small amount of civil case, and this is a civil case that they're appealing. So it's a very, very, very tiny chance of them getting it to be appealed or be reviewed by the U.S. Supreme Court. But anything is possible. We've seen crazy things happen. But I think they're making a very calculated error in doing this because of the publicity that's going to surround this. The fact that they're going to the public and they're saying, hey, you know, and this, by the way, it's a Hail Mary pass. It is a long shot Hail Mary pass. According to the attorneys I've talked to, Watchtower's got nothing to lose by doing this. In my opinion, they do have something to lose because they are revealing their strategy, which is, and has always been, we are allowed to keep these matters confidential and not cooperate with the police or not report these matters to the authorities because of clergy penitent privilege and other reasons that they cite.
Javier, Watchtower has a long history, as I'm sure you're aware, with the Supreme Court, which you could say is, in a way, one of the arguments that the organization uses in trying to defend itself, in saying, look at all of the civil rights victories that we've had in securing freedoms, not just for ourselves, but for all Americans, in, for example, the flag salute issue, and in, religious freedom and that kind of thing. What do you think it says about the organization in 2019 that they are now kind of throwing this proud history under the bus for their right to keep secret child abuse records?
Yeah, I think it speaks to the arrogance of the leadership, really. Because if you look at those early Supreme Court cases, they were about religious freedoms, right? They were about their rights to not salute the flag. They were about their rights to preach in certain areas, go door to door in certain areas without any opposition. They were legitimate cases that had to do with the rights of protected under the Constitution of the United States. In this case, the right that they're trying to protect is to avoid providing information about pedophiles to the criminal justice system. And it doesn't, like, those two arguments, they can't be on the same plane. It just doesn't make any sense. But because they're proud of their heritage and the fact that they won these landmark Supreme Court cases, they think that this is part of that too, and it really isn't. This is about victims' rights. This is about protecting children. And the fact that they're pushing this so hard, is kind of disturbing.
Tony, this is one of many videos that we've done now on Watchtower in Focus about child sex abuse. And one kind of issue that we grapple with is what's in it for Watchtower and kind of clinging on to these outdated policies with respects to child sex abuse. I mean, their reputation is in tatters on this issue. Why have they chosen this hill to die on? Why is it so important to them that they get to basically cover up child abuse? Surely it's in their interests to be more transparent and to make sure criminals see justice. Are you as flabbergasted as we are?
Well, you'll have to tell me how this compares with Jehovah's Witnesses, because I can tell you on the Scientology side, you see a lot of examples of this where they do things that perplex you because it just doesn't make any sense with what a major corporation would do as far as trying to heal its reputation or deal with the public or deal with bad press. They always seem to do the worst things over and over and over again. But in Scientology's case, that's a direct result from the fact that L. Ron Hubbard created all of Scientology's policies. Then he died in 1986 and they can't change them. So he, as far as these legal strategies they use, he wrote those legal strategies down in the 50s and 60s, and they are still following that playbook to a T. I mean, you can always kind of predict what Scientology is going to do in court because they do the same thing over and over and over again. So, you mentioned a Hail Mary, and Mark was talking about how little chance there's in the Supreme Court. Scientology is the same way. Now, why don't most responsible corporations, even some of the ones we think of as kind of bullies, why wouldn't they throw a Hail Mary like this? Because they're expensive. Do you know how much it costs Watchtower just to have that document written and submitted as a petition to the Supreme Court? You have to hire the absolute best attorneys who charge the highest rates and spend months researching and writing that document. You can't imagine how expensive that is. And so that's why most corporations don't do this. They want to settle things. Yes, of course they want to control information. Of course they want to get through civil lawsuits. But with organizations like Scientology, money's not an object. And Hubbard has told them to do the most ridiculous things. So they just throw things at the court. They'll, one of their favorite, I don't know if Jehovah's Witnesses is paying attention, one of their favorite things to do is try to disqualify the other attorneys. This is a really very mean and unfair kind of a strategy, but it's something Scientology loves to do in court. They try to disqualify the attorneys. They try to sanction the other side. They try to hide documents. They will, all these terrible time-wasting things, and appeal to a level that's just, ridiculous if you had a budget. But they don't have a budget. They just spend all they want.
But neither does Watchtower, right? I mean, if you look at the that document, that writ that we were talking about, it was drafted, it seems, by Watchtower's own legal counsel. If you have a team of lawyers on staff at your beck and call, you can afford to take cases to the Supreme Court because you're not really paying traditional attorney fees, And in this case, money is not an object. These guys, they're dedicated to work for Watchtower. So
yeah, I'll say in the case of Watchtower, it's a combination of both. What Tony was saying and what Javier was saying, it really is that they've got this primary attorney who has fought a Supreme Court case before. The Supreme Court appeal was written by Paul Polidoro, or at least it was under his name. And the second listed attorney was Joel Taylor, who was the attorney of record in the Montana case. But remember that in most all of these cases, they have hired at a very, very high rate of pay these outside firms. For example, in Montana, they hired a law firm to represent them in Montana, along with their attorney as first chair or as second chair. In the California cases that have been fought, including this one by the Zalkin firm, Watchtower has hired numerous law firms in the state of California and elsewhere to defend them at tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars to defend them. So, and I wouldn't be surprised if they got some advice and help with this lengthy Supreme Court appeal. So yeah, they are spending a great deal, maybe millions of dollars in being defended in these various states, and then now and finally going before the United States Supreme Court.
I'm wondering, Mark, if you can just summarize, because as you say, Owen Zalkin's reply to Watchtower's petition, I've not kind of read it page from all the way through, but it appears to be brilliant and kind of rather embarrassing for Watchtower just how replete with flaws their entire premise is. But I do want to kind of highlight one thing that Owen says actually on page 2 of his reply. Is it 130 pages, Watchtower's petition, and
yes,
Zalkin managed to respond to it in just 23? It's just astonishing. Yes. And on page 2, he says, while the constitutional positions taken in the petition are radical and overreaching, this court need not delve into them before declining review because of the myriad infirmities with the petition itself, which is permeated with blatant misrepresentations and intentionally deceptive omissions. I glanced through, again, there's no way I'm going to commit to reading 130 pages of nonsense, but I did just skim through and I already found one, which is on page 5, where it says, hang on a moment. So it's where they're talking about the 1997, oh no, actually it's on page 4. Watchtower says, accordingly, the January 1st, 1997 issue of the Watchtower contained an article entitled, Let Us Abhor What Is Wicked, that provided religious direction to Jehovah's Witnesses regarding appointment processes. So appointment means processes for appointing elders. It explained that those who engage in the sin of child abuse do not meet the scriptural qualifications to hold ecclesiastical positions in the congregation. Bear in mind those words, and let me read to you some words from a letter dated October 1st, 2012, to all bodies of elders. It cannot be said in every case that one who has sexually abused a child could never qualify for privileges of service in the congregation. So I was just skimming through, and already I found one blatant lie in the document where they said, we'd never appoint a child molester is an elder, and that's clearly not what they've said in the past.
They've left a loophole open there, and it's really scary.
Surely it's against the law to lie to the Supreme Court like that. Would they not face censure for such an outlandish lie? I don't know.
Well, and Roy, this is what drives me crazy, is with the Scientology petitions, they lie. And this is a non-Scientology, very prestigious, high reputation Los Angeles attorney telling the Supreme Court of California, telling the Supreme Court of the United States that this material is religious and highly sacrosanct. And then, no, they decide not to pay attention. They turn it over, and it's not. It's just disgusting records of how they mistreated this girl. And what I want to know is, why is there no penalty for that? Why does that attorney get to lie to the highest courts in this country on behalf of this disgusting organization, and he doesn't pay a price? This is one of the things that drives me crazy.
Well, yeah, I would agree with that, because these, I think in a previous case, in one of the other Zalkin cases, we had the court just blast Watchtower. Initially, they issued a $13 million default judgment against Watchtower, and they called Watchtower a recalcitrant litigant.
My favorite word.
That's Javier's favorite phrase.
You're so recalcitrant.
Recalcitrant litigant. But take a look at these. Yeah, I mean, we can't go through all of this today, but
hey, Mark, I did want to point out, if I can, I mean,
please.
like along the lines of what Lloyd was saying, like, I mean, he pointed out just a blatant lie, right? But there's other parts of their request here where it's not an outright lie, but it's a very deceptive thing to say. So, like, if you look on page 3, where they make the argument that Cimental there was no evidence that he was a danger to children, right? Which is obviously a lie from what you've determined. But right after that, they say, moreover, some 5 years prior to the abuse, Watchtower was no longer the national office involved in affairs of congregations of Jehovah's Witnesses in the United States. As of 2001, Christian Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses, a corporation plaintiff voluntarily dismissed, was the entity involved in the affairs of the congregation. And I mean, it's obvious to me, right, having been a Jehovah's Witness, that that's just a technicality, right? This is just an argument over entities and who's involved over what and who oversees what. From a practical sense, every Jehovah's Witness or no Jehovah's Witness would make a distinction between CCJW and Watchtower and whatever other entities there are in the organization. To them, they're all the same.
They're all alter egos of each other, the same way with Scientology, right? Tony, you have all these organizations that are alter egos of each other, and they really are representing the same core cause, but Watchtower is trying to get off on a technicality.
And the crazy thing about that is, especially recently, Watchtower kind of is proud of themselves in that everyone in the organization, whether you're in a different continent, country, you're hearing the same talks at all the conventions, you're hearing the same talks at the weekly meetings. Everyone shares the information. There's unity of ideas and thought, right? But in the court cases, they're like, hey, that wasn't us. That was CCJW, and they're not part of this. And to me, I think, like, if more people could see the arguments that Watchtower and its attorneys make in court, it really is like that phrase that we use where you see a sausage being made. So let me show you a really nasty sausage, because before this got
those are words I never thought would be spoken on a Watchtower in Focus episode.
I'm not even going to go there, but where I am going to go is to this. So look, we're at the Supreme Court level now, where they're making their last ditch appeal, but long before that happened, in this civil case, when Watchtower was fighting against JW and her attorneys, the Zalkin law firm, they said some things during pretrial depositions that were very, very revealing. And this all had to do with the fact that they weren't producing these documents. And one of their attorneys was a man by the name of Mr. Rouse. And so I've got a copy of his deposition. I just want to read one small section out of this, because I want the public to understand what Watchtower's viewpoint is on why they feel that their elders can handle a situation that the police ought to be handling. Okay, so what was going on here was this discussion between attorney Devin Story for JW, the judge, which is the court, and Mr. Rouse, who represented Watchtower. So Rouse says, well, you know, he says, let me say this, Your Honor, they've brought a lawsuit against a church and a religion. And the role that our government, back to the Constitution, has assigned to religions and churches is that when people sin and make mistakes, that the people, not just the victims, but the people that do wrong and the families, all of them go to their ministers for consolation and to change their behavior, even child molesters. Then he says, if he wants, now this is the witness, the attorney for Jehovah's Witnesses. He says, if he wants to change his behavior, the church, all these churches have a much better record than throwing him in prison for 30 years. I'm going to read that again. If he wants to change his behavior, the child molester, the church, all of these churches have a much better record than throwing him in prison for 30 years. They really do. And they have to communicate with their ministers. They struggle. All these folks struggle. There it is.
Crazy. That is crazy.
This is
they
what
they're
they're
better at dealing at,
yes.
at protecting the public from a pedophile than the prison system.
Well, Lloyd, you asked such a good question. I want to answer it in another way, if I can. You asked, you know, why don't they do something? Why do they give in on this issue? Why aren't they changing? And one of the, and I don't know if this will break loose something for you guys with JW, but on the Scientology side, I found this amazing early lecture from L. Ron Hubbard, and I had Sonny Pereira help me interpret it. And what he, you know, in Scientology, the idea is that we're each of us actually this trillions of years old immortal being called a Thetan. And we've lived countless times. And in those 76 trillion years that we've lived, we have seen and done everything, including, and Hubbard says this specifically, sexual killing of children. Every one of us in those 76 trillion years would have done that at some point. And so he uses that to make the point specifically that you should not be pointing your finger at another Scientologist who has molested a child, because all you're doing is re-stimulating your own. In other words, you're dealing with your own guilt that you have done that yourself, and you should keep that to yourself. And Sonny assured me that the point of that lecture definitely was, if you see somebody that commits a molestation like that, you know, as a Scientologist, you should not do anything about it because you have done that yourself.
Well, why stop at molestation? Why not murder?
I know,
right?
It's the specific example he used
Can justify anything.
Was the sexual killing of children. That's the example Hubbard used. And you know, and it's funny because publicly, Scientologists will tell you that one of the best things about Scientology is that, opposed to all of these terrible Christian religions, is that in Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard assumes that human beings are good, as a way to differentiate themselves from original sin in Christianity in the Bible. But then I say, well, how can we all be good when Hubbard in a lecture is saying we've all committed sexual killings of children in our 76-year history? I mean, it's insane. But that's, I think, one answer to what you're saying, Lloyd, is that Scientologists assume the worst about themselves and they don't like to turn each other in.
It's almost as though we've kind of touched on this before, because it's a broad-ranging question, and there could be any number of reasons why Watchtower continues to sit on this. But you have to kind of wonder at some level whether this issue kind of goes all the way to the top, and that's why they're paranoid of.
That's a good question. That's a very good question.
Making it out. It's one theory. Yeah,
it's hard not to think that way, right? Because whenever there's any kind of a corruption in an institution, you know, if it's corruption that starts at the top or is very close to the top, everything under that hierarchy protects the upper echelons of it, right? So it does make you wonder. Like, I mean, you look at it from a human, point of view and sympathy and compassion for the victims and stuff like that, that should naturally make sense to them, right? That their duty is to protect children. When that doesn't happen naturally, it kind of speaks to the possibility that it might be something like that. It might be corruption or somewhere along the hierarchy, and it's just protecting itself. Of course, I don't have any proof of that. But
there's no question that it goes all the way up to the top, because people are people, regardless whether they are an elder, a governing body member, or just a publisher in the congregation. And we've learned from discussing, for example, the case of Roderick Watkins, who was arrested last November for molesting multiple children in Arkansas. Well, I don't know if, we haven't talked about this publicly, but as a result of the JW Survey article regarding Watkins, we knew that he had moved from Indiana to Arkansas. Well, after that article, we got contacted by people who knew him in Indiana and come to find out that he has multiple victims in Indiana, including some that have spoken to us and we've gotten them in touch with the authorities. But I want to say this, so it can happen. And this guy was a prominent elder. He was a service overseer. He was a special pioneer. He was assigned to live in the Kingdom Hall in Indiana, and he lived right next to the Kingdom Hall in Arkansas. So it doesn't matter. And this went on for years and years, and he drugged his victims. It was a very serious situation. Very high-level elder. Assembly overseer, very respected. So what Watchtower, though, is arguing is that well, let me just say this. We go back 100 years. Law enforcement was maybe down here 100 years ago. And the way that people look at law enforcement and child abuse is maybe here, and maybe the clergy was up here. Okay, so that people in the old days, maybe 100 years or even 50 years ago, would trust their clergy members, and they would say, well, we want to bring these sins, these things to the attention of our clergy members. And it wasn't really treated, we didn't have the attention to sexual acts of violence, whether it be rape, spousal abuse, elder abuse, child sexual abuse, didn't have the attention that we do now have in law enforcement. So whereas you might have gone to your clergyman 50 years ago, and here's law enforcement down here with very little tools. Now, law enforcement is way up here with professionals that their entire life is dedicated to researching, uncovering, helping victims of abuse, getting them therapy, figuring out whether a person is a child molester or not. So Watchtower is using this old, outdated model of tell everything to the priest, tell your elders everything, let them handle it. They'll spiritually readjust this person. That just doesn't work anymore. And it doesn't work, period. It's a sickness. It's something that you can't just flip a switch or read a few scriptures or keep an eye on a child molester. It doesn't work that way. You've got to let law enforcement handle it. And Watchtower is fighting and fighting and fighting it because they've got something to hide. And part of it is that they're hiding their own strength. Their strength is in that their members will go to those elders and trust them before they trust law enforcement. And this JW case is the perfect example of it. Those parents of those two girls, they went right to the elders. They didn't go to law enforcement.
Mark, we've had discussions about this before with the last the two Watchtower studies on child sexual abuse, and we've talked about how they see it as a sin before they do as a crime. So I fully expect that they will explain things away that way in their literature and in their talks and conventions and stuff. But what kind of shocked me was on page 2 of their statement of the case, and the second paragraph or the last paragraph on page 2, they put it that way in writing on legal documents. They say, they always open with this: Jehovah's Witnesses abhor child abuse, and then it says it's a serious sin. There's a hard stop, and then the second to that, it is a horrible crime. So even on their legal documents where they're appealing to a court to hear an argument on their behalf, they list it second as a crime and first as a sin. And I mean, that speaks volumes to me about the way they approach this crime. It's absolutely a sin to them first. And like you said, they're going to exercise the power that they have over people based on their faith first. before anything. Like you said, in the Scientology case, from what I understand on the decision on the criminal trial, it wasn't reported. I mean, it had gone. Several elders have spoke about it. I've been informed. Elders from another congregation have been informed, and it wasn't until the school principal became aware of it that it was ever reported to the police, and that's just insane to me. But I mean, if they're willing to put this on legal documents, it speaks volumes about the way they're thinking about this.
Yeah, I think the thing is they don't want to set the wrong religious precedent because, or legal precedent. They don't want they believe that the authority of civil law enforcement agencies are becoming, and the government itself is becoming too entangled in religion. And that violates the First Amendment. And there's a portion of the First Amendment called the Establishment Clause that says that one religion can't be treated with favor over another religion. So that's one of the arguments that Watchtower is making, is that, well, they're not treating us fairly because they're using this Catholic model. And I think I've mentioned this in previous episodes where we talked about the Montana case. I confronted Watchtower's lead attorney, Philip Brumley, when I was in New York, right after, less than a month after the Montana case, where Watchtower lost $35 million jury verdict against them, $31 million for malice in telling those elders not to report. And I went to Brumley and I said, tell me what happened in that case. Was this a case of clergy privilege? And he said, yes. He said those elders neither had the right nor the duty to report that abuse. They fully admitted it. They said, yes, we told those elders not to report the abuse. And that is what they still do in all of these cases. Now, I live in Maryland, and in every single case, and I know of many cases from growing up in this area and having many of my friends abused by elders, pioneers, others, that the elders never once went to the authorities, because Maryland law is that, yes, number one, you should report, clergy are mandated reporter, but number two, there is clergy penitent privilege. And what they've done is they've expanded the definition. Watchtower is saying, oh, hey, hang on a minute. You can't just tell me that it's just between the priest and the penitent or the child abuser. You can't tell us that because that's not fair. That our procedure is different. And Philip Brumley told me the same thing. He said the Catholic Church, they have one elder or priest, and we have three priests. Those were his exact words, meaning the Judicial Committee. He said, we have three priests. So they're claiming that it's not fair to say that in the Catholic Church, you have this confidence between the priest and the penitent, but over here in Jehovah's Witnesses, all of a sudden, when this second elder and a third elder and a fourth elder and all these other elders know about it, that it's not fair to say that that's no longer confidential, because they're saying that violates the Establishment Clause, that they're treating one religion differently than another religion. So this is one of the core arguments that Watchtower is making. But as we've seen in the case that Burke Strunsky, the prosecutor, wrote about, in every single case, that argument fails because it does break the law. They are breaking confidence, and it's not just the priest. It's not a case of the child molester going to an elder saying, I confess, because Simmental didn't do that. He was caught. He was caught because those two girls came forward to their parents. They had the bravery to come forward and tell them what had happened to them. Fortunately, each had each other. And they went to the parents, and the parents went to the elders, and the elders didn't tell the police. They were told not to tell the police. But if they hadn't gone to that school principal, if the parents had gone to the school principal, this would have never been revealed to the authorities, and this guy could still be out there molesting children. So, we've got a real problem in this country where, we are giving this authority to religions that they honestly don't deserve. And it's not a case of the penitent man like Simmental. He didn't go to the elders and say, I'm sorry. It was because he was caught, and then the elders had this huge investigation where they went to Simmental and they questioned him, and then they went to and still didn't disfellowship him. So because they initiated the investigation, that does not qualify for clergy privilege. That's the elders investigating some sin that occurred.
Probably because he was sorry. because as we know, pedophiles can be sorry, according to Watchtower. I
Right.
think we've established that this is a shocking case of Watchtower trying to move the goalposts and having routinely flouted the law, just trying to change the law basically in their favor. Good luck to them. But what we usually do at this point in the show is do a roundup of the news. Unfortunately, we don't have Covert Fade with us, so we can't do that. And I'm wary of the fact that Mark's got his work cut out already, putting the finishing touches to this article, which again, I would urge you all to read once it's finished. So what we'll do instead is just switch to what we do is we go round the panel and just give our concluding thoughts, and then we'll wrap up the show. So maybe if we start with Javier, what are your concluding thoughts on what we've been discussing? Is Javier with us?
I think he's praying.
Okay, so maybe if we switch to Tony then.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up one more procedural thing just for what's coming, just to prepare you. Mark had mentioned that thousands of petitions get sent to the Supreme Court and they only choose about 100. Well, there's a process to get there. There's a winnowing process. And you don't have to convince all 9 justices initially to get your petition considered. At the beginning level, it only takes 1 justice. And that did happen for Scientology. Justice Kennedy actually decided that the Supreme Court would consider the Church of Scientology's petition, at least at that level. And we were all kind of shocked, I can tell you. We were all like, oh no, the Supreme Court's actually going to take this on. And you should know that, and Mark described well what the Supreme Court is up against. They are only interested in choosing cases where they feel like there's some constitutional issue that needs resolving. And while this might be a very important case to Jehovah's Witnesses, it might be a huge case to the Watchtower, that doesn't necessarily mean that the Supreme Court believes that there's some issue that desperately needs their wisdom. So chances are it won't be heard, but don't be surprised if they find 1 justice to at least get it to the next level. That's what happened with Scientology. And briefly, it was still in play, but then at the next level, it got cut out. So look for something like that, and I'll be interested too to find out how it turns out.
Interesting. So it only needs 1 of the justices to move it forward. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. For the first level, it only needs 1 justice to say, okay, we'll think about this, and then then basically his clerks look at it for a couple of weeks and make some reports, and then it's got to go to a larger panel. And Scientology didn't get that far, so that was their last. Like Mark said, this is the last shot. And at that point, it wasn't an appeal of a done case. At that point, a lawyer did get her files, and then ultimately, she won a large settlement, and that was a big victory against the Church of Scientology.
Fantastic. Well, it seems that we've lost Javier. He's not been disfellowshipped. Technical issues have thwarted our efforts to speak to him and ask for his concluding comments, unfortunately. But Mark, perhaps you could give your concluding comments, and this will also give Javier more time to get back if he can. So,
yeah, hopefully we'll hear back from him again. So, yeah, the opposition motion that was filed against what Watchtower has appealed to the Supreme Court on, it's a brilliant document. We'll be posting it on JW Survey, and maybe you'll have it in your comments, I'm not sure, or in the description of your video. But these documents are readily available for the United States Supreme Court website. You can get them in about 30 seconds. So I encourage everyone to please read those documents. You're going to have a lot of questions, and we'll try to answer them as best we can. And if we don't have the answer, we will get an answer from a qualified attorney. But I will say that going back to this document, what Devin Story and the Zalkin firm and his legal team have said, point number 9, given its consistent history of disrespect for the legal system and disregard of adverse rulings, Watchtower is the wrong litigant to champion any issue before this court. That's on page 15 of the opposition. And I thought that was a really, really hard-hitting statement that, as we discussed before, Watchtower has been called a recalcitrant litigant in court, in multiple other cases, because of the refusal to comply with court-ordered demands for documents. And they are one of the worst offenders of any religious organization in terms of child sexual abuse. In fact, I'll read this one sentence from Burke Strunsky's book, which is, again, it's called The Humanity of Justice. Chapter 7 deals with the Simmental case. Aside from being a prosecutor, this man is not an ex-witness, has nothing to do with witnesses. He just found that prosecuting this Jehovah's Witness former elder and getting no cooperation whatsoever from the elders was one of the most defining moments of his career, and he had to write about it. And so he did write about it in this book. But what he said was, he said, historically, the most prominent religious organizations involved in criminal and civil child sexual abuse cases include the Roman Catholic Church, the Jehovah's Witnesses organization, and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, also known as the Mormon Church. And he makes a point that he's not trying to single out Jehovah's Witnesses, but he lists Jehovah's Witnesses as second among the worst offending organizations that either cover up or have a problem with child sexual abuse. So, I just want to say, thanks to everyone that has reached out to us at JW Survey for giving us information which helps the public. We've been reached out to by numerous victims, for example, of the man in Arkansas, the elder that abused so many young children. Thank you to all those who had the strength to reach out and share your stories. I will say that, one of the messages that I've gotten from victims is that, and there's this famous quote, I forget the name of the guy that the quote is by, but if good men do not, just stand by and don't change things for the better, then things will never get better. So a lot of people say, well, why do you talk about this all the time? Why don't you just go and live your life? Why don't you leave Jehovah's Witnesses alone? Why don't you leave Scientology alone, Tony? Come on, leave them alone. They're just going about their business. There's only about 20,000 of them or so. I mean, come on. In the case of Jehovah's Witnesses, we know there's about 8 million, but why look, if we don't do the right thing, and if we don't hold these religions accountable, and if these attorneys don't hold these religions accountable for their behavior, the bad behavior is going to continue and continue and continue. Somebody's got to do this work, and JW Survey and Tony Ortega and his underground bunker and all of these other people who are doing it, they're doing it because they're trying to do the right thing. And that's my segue into Javier Ortiz, who's the producer and director of The Truth About the Truth, and he's trying to do the right thing with his film.
Sure. So, Javier, thank you for rejoining us. And now that you're back with us, reinstated into the conversation, what are your concluding thoughts?
Yeah, I had a little trouble with my connection. But yeah, Mark always, he always finds the right words. I think the quote you were looking for was the Burke, I think it was, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to stand by and do nothing, or something like that.
That is the message that some of the victims have asked me to give to the public, and so thank you for correcting that phrase. Yes,
and I feel strongly about that as well. Having these conversations, the stuff that Lloyd does and Tony does online, you do with the research and the advocating for victims, all of this stuff is important, because if there isn't a group of people that is out there doing this, it just makes it easier for Watchtower to get away with it. I highly recommend, a big part of what woke me up was looking at the transcripts of, and we talked about this before, of the Candace Conti trial in California, where when you see the doublespeak and the I mean, because a lot of times it's not outright lies, right? They don't outright lie, but we as former Jehovah's Witnesses, we know how we're taught to think and how the organization presents itself to its members. And when you see that they're just deceptive and there's double speak in these court transcripts, and the arguments that they make are just very, very deceptive and tricky, and a lot of legal speak. When you see that, you can't unsee that. So I recommend for people, if you have access to a lot of Mark O'Donnell's files, they're available online. If you have access to the Supreme Court website, you can download a lot of this stuff and read it. It really is eye-opening. That information needs to get out there. A lot of this stuff, Mark, I know you can wrap your head around this stuff. I have to sit down and have Google opened up next to it because I have to Google a lot of these terms and try to understand. So I've spent a lot of the time this morning. I was actually reading about the clergy penitent laws in the United States, and this stuff dates back to the early 1800s, and it was brought on by the Catholic Church. So to see that the Jehovah's Witness organization is trying to expand on the scope that these clergy laws that were advocated for by the Catholic Church, it seems counterintuitive to what you believe as a Jehovah's Witness, right? The Catholic Church is the big, scary monster, and
Christendom.
And Jehovah's Witnesses are trying to expand on a law that protects this big scary monster. And so, that has to be eye-opening to people. So I highly recommend people, if you can, and if you have the stomach for it, take a look at these documents, take a look at these cases, read some of this legal language, try to understand it as best you can. But if you understand the history and where it comes from, you'll get a bigger picture of where the organization is today and what they're trying to do. And it's far from Christian. It really is. It's the easiest thing to do is to protect the people that are the most vulnerable. In this case, is children. Not doing that is the farthest thing that you can be from a Christian. So please, take a look at that. And I thank you all for all your work as well. I always appreciate it.
Thank you.
Wonderful. And we will have links to the documents that we have been discussing in the description below if you want to check them out for yourself. As Javier said, we're not making this up. It's all there in black and white if you want to read it. And in my view, at least, it's shocking hypocrisy when you compare what Watchtower is saying here with what they're telling the members. So again, thank you so much to my panel. Thank you to Mark for your investigation and research on this. Thank you to Javier and Tony. I think at some point we need to have a battle of the bunkers, maybe an arm wrestle. What do you say?
Absolutely.
But no, thank you so much for joining the panel. It's been really interesting to have your insights. Viewers, I hope you have enjoyed this episode of Watchtower in Focus. Don't forget to subscribe to the John Cedars channel for more such videos. And as always, thank you so much for watching.